Hello and welcome back to the DH Pickleball Show. My name is Mike Behrens, and on the DH Pickleball Show, we sit down every week with David Henry to talk about his journey in the world of pickleball. David recently started, or not recently, a couple years ago, started playing pickleball and wanted to share his journey and the tips and tricks that he does to optimize his game. And so that's what we do here on the DH Pickleball Show. So let's welcome in my good buddy, David Henry. How you doing, man?
Hey, very well, Mike. Happy to be here in another episode. Love talking about this stuff. So I'm thrilled. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I'm glad that you're thrilled to be here. This is your show, after all.
Yeah. I better be. I better be thrilled to be in my own show.
Oh, I love it. All right, so we're coming off of the heels of last week's episode where we talked about paddle customization, balance, swing weight, and all the things that it takes, and how you start to customize your paddle. I think you kind of blew me away a little bit with all the things that are there, and so we want to take a little deeper dive into this and give people a step-by-step on how you actually do it, so that they have a good place to get started. Because we kind of teased them with it at the last episode, so we would be kind of rude if we didn't go for that.
For sure.
Let's give everybody a quick recap of weight, balance, swing weight. What are we talking about? What did we talk about in the Cliff Notes version of last week's episode, so we can dive into the step-by-step this week?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talked about how paddles coming out of the box from the manufacturer, even if it's the same brand and same paddle, the specs with regard to weight, balance, and swing weight, the specs can be vastly different. And I rattled off some specs of 3 identical Yola paddles that I have, how different those were out of the box. And then, to be fair to them, I talked about 2 Franklin paddles that I have, and they're the exact same brand, exact same model, and their specs were different. And so, because those specs are different, that forces me to implement a concept or a process called paddle matching. And paddle matching is where I take all 3 of my Yolas, for example, and I match them identically to weight, balance, and swing weight. So that way, when I reach in the bag to grab a paddle, I know that it's going to play the exact same way. It's going to feel the exact same way. It's going to swing the exact same way as my other Yolas. So again, I could cover my eyes, grab one out of the bag, and it's going to play identically. And so that's why that concept of paddle matching is just so important to me, because if I didn't match the paddles, the out of the box differences, I'd notice, I'd feel them on the court. And then I'd end up having a favorite paddle, and then I want to use that one all the time. And, I want to have even wear on my paddles and things like that. And so paddle matching is just so critically important to what I do. And I love having my paddles matched.
Yeah, for sure. And for those of you who have not seen last week's episode, I would highly suggest that you go back and watch it, because you can see how important this is to David, and how, what was the word? Obsessed he is with this stuff, because it's really, really fascinating to me as a novice in the pickleball world, and learning about pickleball from David firsthand. It is pretty cool, especially if you're new to the concept of paddle customization. So, all right. So that's go back and watch last week's episode, because that's what it is. Talk a little bit, give you a baseline, and then come back to this episode and finish watching this one, because we're going to give you a step-by-step on how to do that. So let's start. What's the first step with getting going here?
Yeah. So what we're going to talk about tonight, I'm going to use those 2 Franklin paddles as an example. So even though the color is different, it's just a different color of the face. These are the exact same Franklin Ben John signature paddles, and exact same brand, exact same model. And so the very first step is I want to see what these paddles are at currently. So what are their naked specs? And when I say naked, I take off any weight that was around the paddle or any tape. I take off the grip down to the bare handle, and I want to see what are the naked specs. And so I'm measuring weight, just using, again, like we talked about last time, just this little cheap old kitchen scale. I'm seeing what the weight is. I use a balance board to get the balance. And we showed how that kind of worked in the last episode. And then lastly, and most importantly to me, I've got my Swingweight, my Behrens Swingweight machine that I use. So basically that's step 1, is just basically let's see where these paddles come in at, to see how much of a difference there are. And so with the Franklin paddles, naked Franklin 1, which is the white version, that was 212 grams, whereas Franklin 2 was 222 grams. So that's a significant 10 gram difference right there out of the box. Then the balance were very similar on both of them. The Franklin 1 was 13 points head heavy, and Franklin 2 was 14 points head heavy. So super similar. But because the balance points were the same, but the weight was so different, I knew the swing weights were going to be different. Right. And so the lighter weight paddle is going to have a lower swing weight. So it came in at 120 on the swing weight machine, whereas Franklin 2 came in at 125. So right there, two quote unquote identical paddles were not identical.
Sure. And then, okay, so the naked paddle piece, you just strip down, how much of it do you strip down first just to help me for my head?
Yeah, really, if it's out of the box, there's going to be no perimeter tape around it. There's going to be no weight on it, so you don't have to do anything there. So nothing there, and it's just basically taking off the factory grip. Oh, so a factory grip comes on. These are not factory grips on here, and these are Overgrips, and we talked about that I think in episode 2. But that would be it. Would be taking off the factory grip and getting down to the bare handle. And what I even do again, I know. OCD, obsessed, or whatever people want to call me. But I up in my supply closet, I was pointing up there, up in my supply closet where I keep all my paddle customization supplies. I have a bottle of Goo Gone. So just because when you take off the factory grip, a lot of times there's glue residue on the handle. And I'm just so obsessed that I don't want any bit of glue residue or a clump of glue or whatever adding to weight to the paddle or whatever. So basically I'm glad you asked a question about stripping it down. That's another step that I forgot to mention is I take the bottle of Goo Gone and I get it down to just a perfectly bare handle.
So for someone who wasn't going to replace the grip, which I know that's important and that's an important step of the customization, but for somebody that was doing this, wanted to customize the swing weight and figure it out, they wouldn't necessarily have to strip the grip, and they could just measure it with the factory grip on it and then match the paddles after the fact.
Correct. That would 100% work. You just have to assume that the same amount of grip was used, that the finishing tape on the grip, the same amount of tape was used. Sure. So there could be some slight differences, but if you're not as obsessed as me and you didn't want to take off the original factory grip, you're right. You could start there as your point. I prefer to start at the naked point of the paddle because I know that I am going to put 2 of the exact same Overgrips on.
Right.
I know that I am going to wrap the Overgrips the exact same way, so I'm not putting more material on one versus the other. I measure out the finishing tape that I put on there. I measure that finishing tape out. So I know that I'm putting the exact same amount of finishing tape on there. And then I'm going to weight them the same, if any perimeter weighting or whatever. So I know that once I get a mat perfectly naked, from that point, I'm going to do the exact same thing to both paddles. So they're still going to be the same.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yep. Makes sense. Makes sense in my head now.
Yeah,
cool.
Good.
All right. So first thing is to see where it's at, test, get it stripped down, and then test the weight, the balance, and the swing weight. And then what? What do we do next?
Yeah. Then you kind of gotta get your brain working a little bit and kind of come up with, okay, what's the plan? What do I need to do in order to match these paddles? So in the case of these 2 Franklins, it's actually pretty simple because the lowest weight paddle, Franklin 1, was actually also the lowest swing weight paddle. So I just got to take Franklin 1 and bring it up to match Franklin 2. That's super simple. What you could have at other times, and I've encountered this with my Yolas, you could have one paddle where the weight is the highest, but the swing weight's the lowest, and another paddle where the swing weight's highest and the weight's lowest. So then, you've got to you have to raise both the swing weight and the weight slightly and match them along the way. So it gets a little bit more tricky when you have that mismatch of the weight and swing weight on different paddles. But in the case of this Franklin, like I said, the weight on Franklin 1's the lowest, the swing weight on Franklin 1's the lowest, even the balance point's the lowest. So all I have to do to match these 2 Franklins is I got to bring Franklin 1 up to the specs of Franklin 2. So that's why I wanted to use that as an example for today because it's simpler. to kind of grasp that concept. So basically what I have to do is I know then, so let me look at my specs again. So I know that I need to add, this one's 10 grams lighter. So I need to add 10 grams of weight to this paddle, and I need to bring the swing weight up by 5, from 120 to 125. So then that takes a little bit of knowledge of, okay, where do I start? Okay. Yeah. So if 10 grams is a lot. Okay. So if I put 10 grams of weight around the perimeter or the top of this paddle, that's going to send the swing weight through the roof. Okay. And then it won't match. I know of how swing weight works, that if I add most of the weight in the handle, any amount of weight theoretically increases swing weight. But I know that if I add weight in the handle, it barely increases swing weight, maybe to the point where it's not even that measurable. So what I know that I'm going to do is I know that I'm going to add the majority of those 10 grams that I need. I'm going to add the most of that 10 grams in the handle, and then I'll probably have to add a little bit around the perimeter in order to bring it up to the swing weight I need. So that's kind of where I start. So that's kind of my plan. Okay. So then from there is to execute my plan. I don't want to, like, all the types of weight that I can add, and we'll talk about the different types and which one. Which one?
Question. It's
we'll get to that in a second. But all the types, they all have some sort of adhesive backing, okay, that are going to stick to the surface that you put them on. Now, it's not so sticky that if you put it in the wrong place, you couldn't remove it. You can, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to waste any of my weighted tape while I'm doing this trial and error. So what I do is I bought this putty. It's just like little wall putty. So if you're going to put a poster on your wall and you don't want to put a nail in it, that little type of putty that you get. I think there's a brand that's pretty popular called Blue Tack. I don't know if you ever heard of that. Anyway, there's all kinds. I think like the putty that I bought is like either Elmer's Glue brand or I don't know. But anyway, there are all kinds of little wall putties. So I buy this wall putty. What I do is, you can see here this putty got three little balls here. I roll these balls. You'll laugh and say that I'm obsessed, but I roll these balls into 1 gram balls. So each of these little balls weighs 1 gram. So I get a little bit of putty, roll it in a ball, put it on the scale, make sure it's at 1 gram. So I will have maybe 10 1 gram balls sitting in front of me when it's time to match my paddles.
Yeah.
So what I do then is I take one of these 1 gram balls and I will I'll push it and put it on the paddle, and I'll spread it out, because if I'm putting tape on the paddle, the tape's not going to be a ball. It's going to be tape. So I spread this putty out, over the paddle. And basically what I'll do is I'll take all 10 grams, all 10 balls of putty, and I will put them around the paddle where I think they need to be. And again, I'm going to put most of that weight in the handle, but then maybe some around the perimeter. Then what I do is I put it in my swing weight machine. I put it on the scale first to make sure, okay, I truly have 10 grams on here. So, got that done. Then I put it in the swing weight machine and measure the swing weight. Oh, I put too much in the handle and it didn't increase the swing weight to 125, which is what I'm looking for in this case.
Sure.
Or I put too much weight up at the head of the paddle, and now my swing weight is past 125. So then if it's not dead on, which it's never going to be really the first time, I'm not that good with my educated guesses on this. So when it's not perfect the first time, then I can make adjustments, and I can just easily peel this putty off, roll it back up, and then I can start over and say, okay, let me move some of that weight from the handle, to the edge here. And I'll do that with the putty. Then I'll put it on the swing weight machine and see. And so it's basically a trial and error process. But I'm methodically going through that trial and error, you can get it nailed.
Huh. That's awesome. That putty's a great idea. Did you come up with that yourself?
I wish I could take credit.
Dang it.
Again, man, a lot of the paddle customization stuff that I learned from tennis.
Oh,
So
sure. Yeah.
no, there's actually where I learned that one. I remember there's a famous stringer. His name is, I say famous stringer. Not that stringers are that famous, but in the tennis world, his name is Richard Parnell. He's strung. I think he's from the UK. He's strung at Wimbledon many times.
Okay.
Over the years, and he's strung at pro level tournaments all across the world. There's even a type of knot that you can tie when you're tying off a string on a racket that he must have come up with this way you loop it. It's called the Parnell knot after Richard Parnell. So anyway, so I learned about the putty from and the rolling into the little balls. I learned that from Richard Parnell on one of his videos.
It's great. It's great.
Yeah.
It's nothing wrong with it. That's awesome.
Sure.
Very cool. Okay, so we measure, we measure, we strip it down, we measure, then we start to add the putty to add the weight to start to troubleshoot and figure out where we're at. Then once we get it set and have a pretty good plan, now what?
Then that's when I take the putty off. So I know exactly where the weight was added to get me to the weight and swing weight that I need to be at. In this case, to get it to, what do we say, to get it to 222 and a swing weight of 125. I know where that putty was. I know where the weight needs to be added. So mental, note of where that weight was. And then I take the putty off and then I put the real weight on the paddle. And so with this, again, you wouldn't think on the surface that there's that much to think about adding weight to a paddle. You just get some lead tape and you add weight. And you certainly can. But I don't use lead tape. Lead is toxic. Again, a little bit of lead on a paddle, is that really going to damage my health? I doubt it.
Yeah.
But if there's non-lead versions, if there's non-toxic versions of weighted tape that I can use, I'm going to use that instead. Sure. And so, but with lead tape, so if people don't care about lead whatsoever and toxicity related to lead, there's all kinds of lead tape that you can buy. There's one that I have tried before and then I've got away from it because I don't want to use lead. A brand called Turna, and they make a real thin lead tape for tennis and for pickleball that most tennis retailers will sell. There is, you can buy all kinds of lead tape off of Amazon, just no brand. And then I really like this one. I mean, again, if I were going to use lead, I would really like this one. But it's a Technofiber, but there's these little bars. It's just like a little 2-inch bar. And I forget how much weight each of these bars, but it's just super clean and easy to apply. It's not like in a reel, or a coil like some of the others. But anyway, so those are the various types of lead. But what I would say, no matter if you're using lead or these other things that I'm going to talk about here in a second that I use, is that I never, like on the outside of the package, it will say 1 inch equals 0.2 grams or whatever. Mm-hmm. I never take that packaging at its word. I always put I always put it on the scale.
Yeah.
Just to see. So I don't want to measure out 2 inches and think I've got half a gram and put it on my paddle and then somewhere down the road realize that I didn't have that weight right. So I'll cut out the 2 inches of tape, but then I'll plop it right on the scale to make sure that I know what I'm dealing with. So, but anyway, so that's lead if you want to do that. But what I use 2 different types of tape depending on where I need to put it. So one that I use is called Katana brand. And what this is, it is copper tape. So it is almost identical to the lead tape, the Turna that I had before, except it's non-toxic because it's copper. And it's a little more expensive because of that, but not that much more. But yeah, it's just a real thin layer of a strip of copper tape. So why this is important, and I also use tungsten tape, but why the copper tape's important is because, like I said, I'm going to have to add 10 grams of, well, not all 10, but most of the 10 is going to go in the handle, okay, on this paddle. Mm-hmm. Tungsten tape's a little thicker than the copper tape. So if I'm putting thick tape in the handle, all of a sudden the circumference of my grip is getting larger.
Yeah.
And we talked about how I like to play with a 4 1/4 inch grip circumference in episode 2 and how important the grip optimization is to me. So I can't put thick tape on there, otherwise my grip's going to get too big.
Sure.
So that's why I love this katana tape. Because I mean, you can see here just like how razor thin this tape is. So I can load up strips of katana tape all down these bevels underneath the grip on the raw handle. I can load up a lot of katana tape to get me 8 grams or whatever I need for this paddle, without really increasing the grip circumference much at all. So that's why I use that. Then if I'm putting it around the tip of the paddle or the corners or whatever to add a little bit more swing weight at the top, I use Wilson tungsten tape. And so it's just might be hard to see here. I don't know. Yeah, you won't be able to tell, but it's a little thicker. And so I just don't want it under my handle for the reasons I just said. But at the top of the paddle, I don't care that it's a little thicker. And because it's a little thicker, I can get more weight in a shorter strip of it. So it just makes sense if I'm putting it around the perimeter here. But if I'm putting it under the handle, I don't want to use a thicker tape.
Sure. So then you get the weight on the handle. Is there any other types of tape that you would use? So if people want to use lead, they can. You wouldn't suggest it because the toxicity of it. But then copper. No, yeah. I mean,
yeah.
We're sharing.
I'm sure. So. I'm sure some people on here will say, "Oh, that's ridiculous. Lead doesn't cause any problems." But then you probably have other people that say, "Oh, yeah, I avoid it." So anyway,
sure. Yeah, whatever. Personal preference. Personal preference. So then, copper tape, tungsten tape. Is there any other tapes out there that would work, or that you've tried, or you had a bad experience with that people should stay away from?
No, I don't think so. I think with lead tape, there's all kinds of different brands and styles that you can buy, and you can buy no brand, like I said, on Amazon or whatever. I think that's the most plentiful. You'll find that pretty easily. Tungsten tape, I know, again, Wilson being in the tennis business for you, I know Wilson makes tungsten tape. I want to say that there might be Babolat or some other brand might make tungsten tape. I believe a pickleball brand, Selkirk, which is a huge paddle manufacturer, one of the top best paddle manufacturers out there, I believe they might have their own Selkirk branded tungsten tape. So yeah, you can find a few. Now, as far as the copper tape, though, I think Katana, Katana, I think they're the only ones that I know of. Again, I could be way wrong. There could be others out there, but as far as what I know, they're the only copper one.
Cool. Okay. All right. So we put the tape back on. We stripped it. We checked it. We puttied it. We took the putty off, put the tape on, got the weight kind of set where we want it. Now what?
Yeah. So then it's basically, I'm going to finish it off. Basically first of all, I'm going to measure it. So just because I tested it and I had it where I wanted it when I had the putty on there, now that I have the real weight on there, I'm still going to measure the weight, the balance, and the swing weight to make sure that I didn't mess up a calculation in my head, or I didn't accidentally put too much of a weighted tape in one area or whatever. So measure it, but yeah, it should check out to where I think it would be. And then it's really just time to finish it. So, I go back and I put my 2 overgrips on top of the katana tape that's on the handle and finish that off. Again, I know exactly how much weight I'm putting there with the grips and the finishing tape. And then I'll do that on the other paddle. Same, so they're identical. And then if I put weight around the perimeter, anywhere on the perimeter of the paddle, I want to secure that. So, for example, on my Yola, I've got just white electric tape that I put all around the perimeter. So I've got tungsten tape at the tip here, and so I don't want to let that tungsten tape just fly off, so I want to secure it down. So so it's just a matter of securing it. But again, I'm going to put the exact same amount of electric tape around the perimeter, exact same amount of grip on, just so that I know that my paddles stay matched. And that's really it.
So then when you get the weight where you want it, you get your swing weight where you want it, the grip, and then that tape to secure it, that doesn't change? Or do you count for that when you're accounting for how much weight you got to add to it? So like we had to add 10 grams to Franklin 1. Do you account for the grip that you're going to grip overwrap, or is that not factored into the calculation?
No, it's not. So my baseline is always the naked paddle. So I know that if I have the naked paddles matched perfectly, then I know that I'm adding the same amount of grip and the same amount of tape to both paddles. So I know they're going to stay matched. The numbers increase for sure. So what I'm trying, so basically, when I'm trying to match the naked Franklin to get the 1 matched to the number 2, I'm adding 10 grams of weight and I'm increasing the swing weight by 5.
Right.
That's my baseline naked paddle. Then I'm throwing on the exact same material on both paddles so that they stay perfectly matched, but the weight is higher. So my finish weight is different. Yeah. So for example, I think that's a good question, and I've got another little note here on my phone. So for my my most recent Yola that I bought, which is a Swift, a little bit lighter version. So the fourth one, this one right here, I have a note on my phone to keep my specs all perfect. And I have 3 different sets of specs. So I have the first one is naked, no grip, no added weight. So that's the pure naked specs. So that's weight of 211, balance point of 13 points H, swing weight of 114, grip 4 inches. Then my second category is what is my matched weight, matched to my other Yolas, my matched weight. So that's added weight, no grip. So, I'm getting, that's the baseline that I just talked about. So that's 226 grams, 11 points, 122. Then I have what's called my final weight. And that's what you're talking about right there. Yeah. So I do all my matching based on naked weight, but then that does change the specs when I finalize it and put the grip on and put the tape on. And I do note what my final weight is. So for that Yola, my final weight is 234 grams, 12 points head heavy, swing weight of 125. That makes sense?
Got it. Yeah, no, it makes sense. So just for clarification on it, for my brain to follow this, when you add the weight, it's obviously going to increase the weight of the paddle, right? Yep. And the overall weight. And then when you add the grip, there's obviously going to be a weight increase there. Does that affect the swing weight of the paddle? Like if you target it for 125, that's what you play with. And so if you target the naked paddle with the added weight to be 125, and then you put the grip on it, and then you put the tape around the edge, does that change the swing weight, or does the swing weight stay the same?
No, it'll change the swing weight, because anytime you're adding weight to the paddle, it's going to change the swing weight. It just depends on where you add it as to how much. So that's a great point. So on my naked paddle that has been matched, so I've added weight to it. It's naked paddle with weight added to it to be at my matched baseline. The swing weight on that is 122. Then when I put 2 overgrips on, I put my finishing tape, and then I put my electrical tape around the top. That takes the swing weight up to 125. So it does add 3 points of swing weight to it.
Got it. Okay. All right. That makes sense. So when you're factoring in and you're doing your calculations, you want to factor in the final swing weight and make sure, how long did it take to figure out how much the grip changes it, or is it different every time?
No, it shouldn't be different every time. I mean, it's just because, again, I'm always putting 2 overgrips. I'm always using the exact same finishing tape. So if it changed the swing weight 3 points, then it'll do that.
Change it
it'll do that every single time. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. And then one thing that one piece of this, that the balance, right? I know in the last episode you said that once you start getting into the weight and swing weight and stuff, the balance isn't as important. But for these two Franklin paddles specifically, one was 13 head heavy and one was 14.
Yes.
Do you try to correct that, or do you just kind of leave that alone? And follow up to that, if it was 14 and 6, would you try to correct it?
Yeah. And so the interesting thing about balance is if you have your weight and your balance the same, it doesn't necessarily mean your swing weight will be the same. And I'll come back to that.
Okay.
But what I've found, and I'm not smart enough to know why or how this is true. But what I found is that if I get the weight and the swing weight the same, the balance kind of takes care of itself in matches.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was the only point of clarity for me. It was like, what about this balance piece? Yeah.
So balance is just a good reference point. I like to know what the balance is on my paddles, just because. But really, as long as I get the weight dialed in and the swing weight, the balance point, because again, you got to remember, swing weight is about the distribution of the weight along the length of the paddle.
Yeah.
So if I've got the swing weight the same, that means the distribution of the weight along the length of the paddle is the same.
Sure.
Therefore, the balance point kind of takes care of itself. Now, what I've learned over time is that as long as you're using trying to match two of the exact same brand and model of paddles, meaning their shapes are going to be the same, the grip length is going to be the same, all the paddle, the thickness of the paddle is the same. As long as you're matching two paddles that are the same, for the most part, if you match weight and balance without buying an expensive swing weight machine, you pretty much are going to have the swing weights close.
Okay.
Not precise, not as precise as I want it, but you could do it and it would work. But where it is, why it's not an example of why it's not perfect is, let's say that you had, probably a bad example, but we'll go with it on the fly here. Let's just say this pin weighed 1 pound. Okay. And let's say I put a tiny little micro barbell plate of 1 pound on the end of each end of this pin. Okay. So the overall weight would be 3 pounds.
Sure.
One for the bar, one for the two plates. And the balance point would be right in the middle. Okay.
Yep.
Now, let's say I took those plates and I scooted them both in the even amount from the end. So I moved them exactly inward the same amount. This still weighs 3 pounds. The balance point is still right in the middle. But I can promise you, if you pick up that stick from one end and try to swing it, it's going to feel different if those plates are on the end or if they've moved in.
Right.
So that's why you can't always say, just because your weight and balance point match, that your swing weight's going to be the same. Because in an example like that, it wouldn't. But because your paddles are generally the same shape, generally the same size that you're matching together, two identical paddles, if you get the weight right and the balance point right, matched perfectly, your swing weight's going to be close.
That's a good point there, because not everybody's going to have a swing weight machine, so that's good to know. But
if I had two different paddles, two different shapes of head size, two different thicknesses, maybe one had a shorter grip, if I had two different paddles and I match those two paddles for weight and balance, the swing weight's going to be drastically different.
Totally.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense.
I just want to make sure I'm explaining this correctly.
Yeah,
clearly.
Let me follow up to that then. So if you had two different paddles, if you were taking your Yola and your Franklin, obviously they're not the same paddle, but could you match them with the weight and the swing weight and feel like you're getting the same play out of both of them? Or because they're different paddles to start with, it doesn't matter?
Well, in the case of these two, they're very similar. They're both thick. They're both 16 millimeters thick. They're both the length and the width. It's 16.25 or 7.5. The grips are both about 5.5 length grip. So these paddles are very, very extremely similar.
Okay.
But I think the question is, though, if the paddles weren't that incredibly similar and I matched them from a weight and swing weight standpoint, in theory, yes, they should feel the same, because the swing weight is the way that it feels when you're swinging it. And so, yes, they should feel the same. Now, I think in the last episode, I talked about another paddle that I recently tested and how I just didn't like it. So I had it matched perfectly from a weight, balance, and swing weight perspective to my Yolas, and I just didn't like it as well. Because there's just other differences. For example, the shape was a little different of the head, and then the surface was different. So you can't account for those things. So, even though the paddle was matched exactly to my Yola's from the weight balance swing weight standpoint, it played very similar to my Yola's. Sure. But there was some difference that I could notice just because the surface was a little different of where the ball's coming off of it, and the shape of the paddle was a little different. But for the most part, yes, if you match on weight and swing weight, should feel the same for the most part.
All right. So then one final question on this, just for my own head knowledge, and sorry, everybody out there, this is me trying to wrap my head around all of this.
Hope I can answer it.
Well, no, this one's easy. So when you match the two Franklins, we've matched the weight, we've matched the swing weight. Do we even bother checking the balance at that point, or is it moot?
I always do.
Okay.
I always do. Again, it should be, if you got that swing weight and weight dialed in, it should be almost identical, cool. And I would call identical 14 points head heavy versus 13 points heavy. I mean, you're talking an eighth of an inch, sure. That's might be notable. Same on the swing weight. If one paddle, if I'm trying to come out with the swing weight of 125 and it comes at 124, it's a rounding error. I'm not going to feel that. But you start talking, 122 versus 125, you're going to start feeling a difference. You talk 120 versus 125, you're going to feel a difference. You talk an even bigger disparity in swing weight, you're going to feel a difference. Back to that hammer example that I gave in the last episode, that, if I grab the paddle, if I hold the paddle this end and swing it, it's going to feel a lot different than if I hold it by the grip and swing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. You answered all my questions. That's it. I think I got my head wrapped around it, and I hope everybody else watching got their head wrapped around it too. If you have questions or comments or anything like that, and want David to dial in a little bit more specifically on something on a future episode, go ahead and leave a comment, and we'll try to answer those questions in future episodes. So, all right. Now, going through the whole thing, strip it down, measure it, get a baseline of what it is. Then add your putty to start to get it to where you want it.
No, kind of come up with your plan though of what you're even gonna do, and then add the putty.
Figure out what you need to do, then start adding the putty. Then once you get it dialed in, then to add the actual tape where you want it. Then check it again to make sure that you got it spot on, and then wrap your grips and finish it off. And we're done.
Absolutely, you got it.
Cool. I just learned how to wrap.
See, you can customize your own paddle now.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up this episode in the step-by-step on how to customize your paddle?
No. I think it's good, and I hope that we've done 3 episodes now on paddle customization. So the first one was dedicated to the grip, and then the second one talked about weight, balance, and swing weight, those topics, and then paddle matching. And then in this one, we dug deep into the step-by-step paddle matching. So we've covered a lot of what I think is great information. I hope others out there that are watching this feel the same way, that it's good information, and hopefully that, they find it to be helpful information, as they're going forward with their pickleball journeys. So that's all I've got, man. I always enjoy talking about this stuff.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Well, then in that case, if you did like this, give us a like, give us a subscribe, comment below. Let us know what you think. Give us some feedback on the show. We're a few episodes in now, and we're excited to get feedback from everybody about what you think. And if you want more information like this, if you want more customization information, let us know. If you have questions about things, we'd love to answer those questions. And that's it for this week's episode of the DH Pickleball Show, everybody. We'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.
Thanks.